So I was running out of energy before, and dinner was ready, and so I had dinner, which was delicious. It was um, rice and shrimp and some vegetables, basically. But after I ate, I had a sudden influx of energy, and because I'm enjoying this book so much, I decided we're going to continue with some more of this. So yeah, no, I have tons of energy now. So, and I just had dinner. So yeah, we're gonna continue. We're gonna continue, and we left on page 33. So we're on page 34 now. And when we stopped, let's see, they were just talking about yes. So the protagonist was talking to the the I guess he's like a human smuggler. He moves people across borders. They were just talking and parting ways, and he asked him where you're staying, and yeah. So I'll have a drink of water real quick, and we'll start. How do we get rid of these like stupid Twitter things? I mean, they're not Twitter things. I don't know. Whatever. Forget it. Continuing, Men in the Sun. They had picked him up a little after sunset. After he had waved them to their small car, when the husband stopped the car, he looked through the window. He was trembling from the extreme cold. His wife was frightened of him, but he gathered together his mind, all the English he had learned, and said, "My friend had to go back to H4 with the car, and he left me." The man interrupted him. "Don't lie. You're escaping from there. All right, get in. I'll take you to Bakuba." The back seat was uncomfortable, and the girl handed him a blanket, which he wrapped himself in. He could not tell exactly whether he was trembling because of the desert cold or from fear or exhaustion. The man asked, "Have you walked a lot?" "I don't know. 4 hours, perhaps." "The guide abandoned you, didn't he?" "That's always happening." The girl turned to him with a question. "Why are you escaping from there?" Her husband gave her the answer. "It's a long story. Tell me, do you drive well?" "Yes." "You can take my place when you've had a little rest. I may be able to help you cross the Iraqi frontier. We will get there at 2 in the morning, and the officials will be asleep." He could not get his mind to focus on one subject. He was confused and didn't know where to start asking the host of questions that needed an answer, so he tried to get some sleep, even if it was just for a half hour. "Where are you from?" "Palestine. Remla." "Oh, Remla is a very long way away. A couple of weeks ago, I was in Zaita. Do you know Zaita? I stood in front of the barbed wire. A little child came up to me and said in English that his house was a few feet beyond the barbed wire." "Do you work in an office?" "Work in an office? Ha! The devil himself is too innocent to be employed in an office. No, my friend, I'm a tourist." "Look, look, there's another fox. Didn't you see his eyes glitter? He's a rat, my dear, a rat. Why do you insist that he's a fox? Have you heard what happened there recently, near Zaita?" "No, what happened?" "The devil himself doesn't know what happened." "Will you stay in Baghdad?" "No." "Oh, the desert is full of rats. Why on earth? What on earth do they eat?" He answered quietly, "Rats smaller than them." "Really?" said the girl. "It's frightening. Rats themselves are horrible, frightening animals." The fat man who had owned the office said, "Rats are horrible animals. How can you sleep in that hotel? It's cheap." The fat owner of the office stood up and came towards him, putting his heavy arms on his shoulders. "You look tired, my boy. What's happened? Are you ill?" "Me? No." "If you are ill, tell me. I may be able to help you. I have many friends who are doctors. Don't worry. You won't pay anything." "You're very kind, but I'm a little tired. That's all there is to it." "Will the preparations take long?" "No, thank the heavens, there are many of you. You'll find yourself on the road in 2 days." He turned his back and went towards the door, but before he went through, it. He heard the fat man chuckling behind his back. But take care the rats don't eat you before you set out. This next section is called Marwan. Marwan came out of the shop belonging to the fat man who smuggled people from Basra to Kuwait, and he found himself in the crowded covered street, which smelt of dates and big straw baskets. He had no definite idea where to make for now. There, inside the shop, the last threads of hope that had held together everything inside him for so long, for long years, had been snapped. The last words the fat man had spoken were decisive and final. It seemed to him that they were forged from lead. 15 dinars. Can't you hear? But I beg you, don't start wailing. You all come here and then start wailing like widows. My friend, my dear friend, no one's forcing you to stay here. Why don't you go and ask someone else? Basra is full of smugglers. Yes, of course, Marwan could go and ask someone else. Hassan, who worked in Kuwait for 4 years, had told him that to smuggle one person from Basra to Kuwait could cost 5 dinars and no more. And then, when he came to stand in front of the smuggler, he must be more than a man and show more than courage, or they would laugh at him, cheat him, and take advantage of his 16 years. They told me that the price for one person was 5 dinars. 5 dinars? Ha! Ha! That was before Adam married Eve. Turn around, my boy. Take 3 steps, and you will find yourself in the road without being thrown out. Marwan gathered all his courage and put it into his words. There were only 7 dinars left in his pocket, and a moment before he had thought himself rich, but now he was being treated like a child. You'll take 5 dinars from me and be satisfied, or else I'll denounce you to the police. Getting up, the fat man came round his desk till he stood panting and dripping with sweat in front of Marwan. He stared at him for a second, looking him up and down, and then raised his heavy hand in the air. You want to complain to the police about me, son of a... The heavy hand crashed down onto his cheek, and the word was lost in a fearful roar, which began reverberating between his ears. He almost lost his balance for a moment, and staggered a couple of steps back. The voice of the fat man, hoarse with anger, reached him. Go, and tell pimps that I've hit you. You'll complain to the police about me? Marwan stood his ground for a short while, which was enough for him to realize that any attempt to restore his honor was futile. In fact, he felt, to the marrow of his bones, that he had committed an unforgivable sin, and the marks of the finger on his left cheek burned. He began to digest his humiliation. What are you waiting here for? He turned on his head and went out through the door. His nose was assailed by the smell of dates and big straw baskets. What should he do now? He had no wish to ask himself the question, yet he didn't know why he felt some sort of relief. What could be the reason for it? He wanted to distract himself by searching for the reason. Part of his mind was taken up with feelings of happiness and relief, but they couldn't sidetrack him for all the sorrows that had filled his heart in the last half hour. When all his efforts failed, he leaned against the wall. Crowds of people walked past without paying any attention to him. Perhaps it was the first time in his life that he had found himself alone and a stranger in a throng of people like this. He wanted to know the reason for that remote sensation that gave him contentment and rest. A sensation like the one he used to have when he had finished watching a film and felt that life was grand and vast, and that in the future he would be one of those men who spent every hour and day of their lives in exciting fulfillment and variety. But what was the reason for his having such a feeling now, when he had not seen a film like that for a long time, and only a few minutes before the threads of hope that had woven fine dreams in his heart had been broken in the fat man's shop? It was of no use. It seemed he would not be able to penetrate the thick veil of disappointment that separated him from the distinct feeling which existed, unexpressed, somewhere in his mind. In the end, he decided not to wear his brain out, but to occupy himself with walking. As soon as he left the wall and began to walk through the crowd, he felt a hand grasp his shoulders. Don't be so desperate. Where are you going now?" The tall man had begun to walk beside him familiarly. When Marwan looked at him, he thought he'd seen somewhere before. All the same, he moved to step away from him and gave him a questioning look. Just a second. "He's a well-known thief," said the man. "What made you go to him?" He answered after a short hesitation. "Everyone goes to him." The man came closer to Marwan and linked his arms through his, and though he had known him for ages, as though he had known him for ages. "Do you want to go to Kuwait? How did you know?" "I was standing by the door of that shop. I saw you go in and come out. What's your name?" "Marwan. And you?" "They call me Abul Kazuran." For the first time since Marwan had set eyes on the man, he noticed that he really did remind him of a cane. He really did remind one of a cane. He was very tall, very thin, but his neck and hands had a suggestion of strength and firmness, and for some reason, he looked as though he could bend down and put his head between his legs without it upsetting his spine or his other bones at all. "Well, what do you want from me?" Abul Khayazuan sidestepped the question with one of his own. "Why do you want to go to Kuwait?" "I want to work. You know how things are there." For months, he suddenly fell silent and stood still. Only now did he recognize the source of the feeling of rest and contentment which he had not been able to discover a few minutes ago before. It was suddenly revealed to him in its full depth and clarity. In fact, in some wonderful way, it had been broken down all the barriers of despondency that stood between him and the realization of it. Here was this feeling taking possession of him again with unparalleled force. The first thing he had done that morning, early, had been write a long letter to his mother. Now, he felt all the more relief because he had written that letter before seeing all his hopes dashed in the fat man's shop, and losing the pure joy that he had poured into the letter. It had been wonderful to spend some time with his mother. He got up early that morning. The servant had taken the bed up to the roof of the hotel because sleeping in the room when it was hot and damp as that was impossible. When the sun rose, he opened his eyes. The weather was beautiful and calm, and the sky was still blue, the black pigeons hovering low in it. He could hear their wings fluttering when they flew over the hotel in a wide circle. A thick blanket of silence covered everything, and the air had a clean, moist scent of early morning. He stretched out his hand to the small case under the bed, took out a notebook and pen, and proceeded to write to his mother as he lay there. It was the best thing he had done for months. He was not obliged to do it, but he did it quite willingly. He was in an excellent mood, and the letter reflected the tranquility of the sky above him. He didn't know how he had allowed himself to describe his father as nothing but a depraved beast, but he was unwilling to discuss the words out once he'd written them. He didn't want to cross out anything in the whole letter, not only because his mother would see the crossed out words as a bad omen, but also, quite simply, because he didn't want to. In any case, he didn't hate his father so much. His father had certainly done something horrible, but which of us doesn't from time to time? He could quite understand his father's circumstances, and he could forgive him. But could his father forgive himself for such a crime? To leave 4 children, to divorce you for no reason, then to marry that deformed woman? It is something for which he won't forgive himself when he wakes up one day and realizes what he's done. I don't want you to hate anybody. It's beyond me to do so, even if I wanted to. Why did he do that? To you. You don't like any of us? To talk to him, I know. But why do you think he did that? It's all over and done with now, and there's no hope of us getting back to him again. Why did he do it? At least let us ask why. I'll tell you why. When we stopped hearing news of my brother Zakaria, the situation finally changed. Zakaria used to send us about 200 rupees from Kuwait every month. The sum gave my father some of the stability he dreamed of. But then we stopped hearing news of Zakaria. Let's hope he's all right. What do you suppose of my father's thoughts? He told himself, in fact, he told all of us, that life is an extraordinary business, and that a man wants to be able to settle down in his old age and not find himself obliged to feed half a dozen open mouths. Didn't he say that? Zakaria had gone. There had been no news of him. Who would feed the mouths? Who would pay for the rest of Marwan's education and buy May's clothes and bring back bread for Riyadh and Salma and Hassan? Who? He is penniless. You know that. His one and only ambition was to move from the mud house that he had occupied in the camp for 10 years and live under a concrete roof, as he used to say. Now, Zakaria had gone. All his hopes had collapsed. His dreams had been destroyed. His ambition has seeped away. So what would he do, you think? His old friend, Shafiqa's father, suggested he should marry her. He told him she owned a 3-roomed house on the edge of the town, which she had bought with the money collected for her by a charity. Shafiqa's father had one desire, to transfer to a husband's shoulders the burden of his daughter, who had lost her right leg during the bombardment of Haifa. He had already had one foot in the grave and wanted to go down into it reassured about the fate of his daughter, who had been turned down by everyone because of that leg, amputated at the top of the thigh. My father thought about the matter. If he let two rooms and lived with his lame wife in the third, he would live out the rest of his life in security, untroubled by anything, and more important than that, under a concrete roof. Do you want to stand here forever? He shook his head and walked on. Abul Khaizuran was looking at him out of the corner of his eye, and he imagined he was about to smile sarcastically. What's the matter with you, thinking like this? Thinking doesn't suit you, Marwan. You're still young, and life is long. Marwan stopped again, jerked his head back slightly. And now, what do you want from me? Abdul Karazan went on walking, so Maran caught up with him again. Can I smuggle you? I can smuggle you to Kuwait. How? That's my affair. You want to go to Kuwait, don't you? Here is someone who can take you there. What more do you want? How much do you want from me? That's not really important. It is. Abul Karazan smiled broadly, and his lips parted to show 2 rows of large teeth, gleaming white. Then he said, I'll be quite honest with you. I've got to go to Kuwait. And I said to myself, why not earn a little money and take someone with you who wants to go there? How much can you pay? 5 dinars? Is that all? I haven't any more. Very well. I accept. Abul Karazan put his hands in his pockets and strode forward, taking such big steps that Marwan almost lost him and had to hurry after him. But he stopped suddenly and shook his finger in front of his lips. But you mustn't tell anyone that. I mean, if I ask someone else for 10 dinars, don't tell him I'm just getting 5 from you. But how do you expect me to trust you? Abul Karazan thought for a moment, then smiled, the same broad smile again, saying, You're right. You'll give me the money in Al-Safa Square in Kuwait, in the capital, in the middle of the capital. Satisfied? All right. But we'll need some more people to make the journey. You must help me. That is my condition. I know someone staying in the same hotel with me who wants to go. That's splendid. I know someone else. He comes from the town where I lived in Palestine in the old days, and I came across him here. But I haven't asked you. What do you want to do in Kuwait? Do you know anyone there? Marwan stopped again, but Abul Karazan pulled him by the arm, and he trotted along by his side. My brother works there. Abul Karazan shook his head, and he hurried along. Then he raised his shoulders so that his neck sank between them, and he seemed shorter than before. If your brother is working there, why do you want to take a job? People of your age are still at school. I was at school 2 months ago, but now I want to work to support my family. Abul Karazan stopped and took his hands out of his pockets, putting them on his hips. He began to stare laughingly at Marwan. Ah, now I understand. Your brother had stopped sending you money, hasn't he? Marwan nodded and tried to walk on, but Abul Karazan caught his arm and stopped him. Why? Has he got married? Amazed, Marwan looked at Abul Karazan and whispered, How did you know? Ah, one doesn't have to be a genius to understand. Everyone stops sending money to their families when they get married or fall in love. Marwan felt a small disappointment growing in his heart, not because he had been surprised, but because he had discovered that was something common and well known. He had thought that his heart held a great secret that no one else knew. He had guarded it from his mother and father for months and months, and here it was now, seeming seeming on the tongue of Abu Kharazan like a well-known self-evident principle. But why do they do that? Why do they deny? He suddenly fell silent. Abu Kharazan had begun to laugh. I'm glad you're going to Kuwait, because you will learn many things there. The first thing you will learn, money comes first, then morals. When Abul Kharazan left him, having arranged to meet again in the afternoon, he had lost yet again those wonderful sensations which had purified him inside throughout the morning. In fact, it would have surprised him that the letter he had written to his mother could give him the marvelous feeling which made his made his disappointment appear less important than it really was. A silly letter, which he had written under the influence of a feeling of loneliness and hope on the roof of a miserable hotel at the end of the world. What was so extraordinary about it? Did he think his mother didn't know the whole story? What did he want to say? Did he want to convince her that her husband's desertion of her and her children was fine and a natural thing? Then why all that talk? He loved his father with a great and unshakable love, but that changed nothing of the terrible truth. The truth that proclaimed his father had fled, just as Zachariah had done. When he got married and sent him a short letter telling him that his turn had come and he must leave that stupid school which taught nothing, and plunge into the frying pan with everyone else. All his life Marwan had found himself at odds with Zachariah. In fact, they hated each other. Zachariah had been quite unable to understand why he had to spend 10 years providing for the family while Marwan went off to school every day like a baby. Marwan wanted to become a doctor. He used to tell his mother that Zachariah would never understand what it meant for someone to get an education because he had left school when he left Palestine. And since then he had plunged into the frying pan, as he liked to say. And here he was now, having married without telling anyone except Marwan, as though he wanted to confront him with his conscience. But what choice had he left him? Nothing, except to leave the school, to plunge into the frying pan, and stay there from now until eternity. All right. In a few days he would reach Kuwait. It would be better if Zachariah helped him, but if he pretended not to know him, he would find out how to start off, as many others had done. He would send every penny he earned to his mother and overwhelm her and his brothers and sisters with gifts, till he made the mud hut into a paradise on earth, and his father bit his nails with regret. Yet he couldn't hate his father so much, for the simple reason that his father still loved them all. Marwan had been completely convinced of that when he went to say goodbye to his father before he left. He did not tell his mother that he was going to Shafiqa's house, or she would have been beside herself. His father said to him there, Marwan, you know that I have no choice in the matter. It is something that has been decreed for us since the beginning of creation. Shafiqa said, we suggested to your mother that she should come and live here, but she didn't agree. What more do you want us to do? She was sitting on a carpet of goatskin. The stick was lying beside her, and he thought, I wonder where her thigh ends. Her face was beautiful, but hard-featured like the faces of all those who are incurably ill, and the lower hip was twisted as though she were about to cry. His father said, take this. It is 10 dinars. You may need them. You will write to us, won't you? When he stood up, Shafiqa raised her arms in the air, praying for his success. Her voice was hoarse, and when he turned to her before going through the door, she broke down and sobbed. His father said to him, may God send you success, Marwan, you brave boy. He tried to laugh. He couldn't. And so he began rubbing the boy's back with his large, hard hand, while Shafiqa picked up her stick and stood up with a quick movement. She had stopped crying. Marwan shut the door behind him and walked away. He could still hear Shafiqa's stick tapping the tiles monotonously, but as he turned the corner, the sound died away. This next section is called The Deal. Marwan brought his companion Asad to the meeting with Abul Kharazan. They arrived a little late and found Abul Kharazan waiting for them, sitting in the Abu Qais on a big concrete seat on the pavement of the street, which ran parallel to the shop. The whole group's here together now, isn't it? Abul Kharazan laughed loudly, striking Marwan on the shoulder with one hand and stretching out the other to shake hands with Asad. So this is your friend? What's his name? Marwan answered curtly, Asad. Let me introduce you to my old friend, Abu Qais. Now, the group's complete. It doesn't matter if one more comes too, but already we have enough now, Asad said. You seem to me to be a Palestinian. Are you the one who's undertaking to smuggle us? Yes, I am. How? That's my affair. Asad laughed sarcastically and then said slowly, bringing out each word forcefully, No, it's our affair. You must explain the details to us. We don't want to have problems from the start. Abul Kharazan said in a decisive tone, I'll explain all the details to you when we've come to an agreement, not before. Asad replied, We can't agree before we know the details. What do the others think? Nobody answered, so Asad repeated the question. What does Abu Qais think? Abu Qais replied, I think as you do. What's your opinion, Marwan? I'm with you. Asad spoke forcefully. Very well, let's be brief. It seems to me that old Abu Qais has no knowledge of this kind of thing, and as for Marwan, it's his first experience. I'm an old hand at this game. What is your opinion if I negotiate on your behalf? Abu Qais raised his hand in the air to show his agreement, and Marwan nodded. Asad turned to Abu Kharazan. You see, they've made me responsible. Let me tell you something. We come from the same country. We want to earn money, and so do you. Fine, but the whole thing must be quite fair. You must explain every step to us in detail and tell us exactly how much you want. Of course, we'll give you the money after we arrive, not before. Abu Qais remarked, Assad's quite right. You must be clear about things. If you start by making conditions, you end up satisfied, as the saying goes. Abu Kharazan took his hands out of his pocket and put them on his hips. He let his gaze wander slowly and coldly over all their faces. First of all, you'll pay 10 dinars each. Agreed? Abu Qais said. Agree. I agree. Assad protested. Please, you have made me responsible, so let me speak. 10 dinars is a large sum. A professional smuggler takes 15. Then, Abu Kharazan interrupted him. So we are disagreeing before you started. That's what I was afraid of. 10 dinars and not a penny less. Goodbye. He turned his back and took two slow steps before Abu Qais caught up with him, shouting, Why have you lost your temper? It's a matter of question and answer. And agreement is the brother of patience. Very well, we'll give you 10 dinars. But how will you take us? Ah, now we're getting somewhere. Listen, Abu Kharazan sat on the concrete seat with the three standing behind him. He explained to them, with the help of his long hands, I have a lorry that is licensed to cross the frontier. Now, you must realize, it's not mine. I'm a poor man, poorer than any of you, and I'm only connected with that lorry because I drive it. Its owner is rich and well known, and so it doesn't wait long on the frontier or get searched. The owner of the lorry is well known and respected, and the lorry itself is well known and respected, and consequently the driver of the lorry is well known and respected. Abul Kharazan was an excellent driver. He had served in the British Army for more than 5 years before 1948, when he left the army and joined the Freedom Fighters. He had a reputation of being the best lorry driver one could find. That's why the commandos in Al-Tira invited him to drive an old armored truck that the village had captured after a Jewish attack. Although he had no experience of driving armored cars, he did not disappoint those who stood on both sides of the road, watching him as he climbed through the small armored plated door and disappeared for a few minutes, after which the mortar roared into action and the vehicle set off slowly down the narrow, sandy road. But it soon broke down, and none of Abu Kharazan's efforts succeeded in putting it into a running order again. If the villagers were greatly disappointed, Abu Kharazan was still more so, but all the same, he had increased the sum of his experience in the world of mechanics, and who could say that this particular experience hadn't helped him when he joined the drivers working for Al-Hajj Rida in Kuwait. One day he had managed to drive a huge water tanker along a muddy salt road without it sinking into the earth and breaking down like all the other lorries in the convoy. Haj Rida had gone out into the desert with a number of his men for some days, hunting. But the spring was treacherous, and as they were returning, the road appeared firm and white, which encouraged the drivers to start along without hesitation. And then all vehicles, big and small, began to sink into the mud one after the other. But Abul Kharazan, who was driving his huge lorry behind them all, skillfully continued advancing without stopping for a second. When he caught up with the Haj Rida's car, whose wheels were three-quarters sank in the mud, he stopped his lorry, getting out, and went up to help Haj Rida, saying, "How would Haj Rida like to get into my lorry? It'll take more than 4 hours to extricate these cars, and by then, Haj Rida will have reached home." Haj Rida replied, "Splendid. The noise of your lorry's motor is kinder to the system than stopping here for 4 hours." Abul Kharazan drove his huge lorry for 6 hours over that treacherous ground, which looked hard and white because of a fine film of salt that had dried on the surface. The whole of the way, he was moving the steering wheel slightly and quickly to the left and right so that the two front wheels could open a path slightly wider than necessary. Haj Rida was delighted with Abul Kharazan's skill and mentioned it to all his friends for months. He was even more delighted when he learned that Abul Kharazan had refused several offers of work elsewhere made to him after the story became known. He asked to see him and congratulated him, and then he increased his wages a little. What was more important was that Haj Rida imposed a condition that Abul Kharazan should be an obligatory companion on every hunting trip or long journey. A week earlier, Haj Rida had set off with a convoy of lorries on a hunting trip he had organized especially for some guests staying with him. He had asked Abul Kharazan to drive the big water tanker which would accompany the convoy the whole way to ensure a supply of water for the entire journey, lasting more than 2 days. The convoy had driven far into the desert when suddenly Haj Rida decided to follow a different route on the return journey, which would bring him to Al-Zubair, and then from Al-Zubair he could take the main road to Kuwait. Abul Kharazan could have been in Kuwait for now with the rest of the convoy if his lorry hadn't developed a small fault that kept him in Basra 2 days longer than it had as it had been repaired, before catching up with those who had gone ahead. "So you want to put us inside the water tank on your lorry when you drive back?" "Exactly," I said to myself. "Why not seize the opportunity to earn an honest penny while you're here, and as your lorry does not get searched?" Marwan looked at Abu Qais and then at Assad. They both looked at him in their turn, questioningly. "Listen, Abul Kharazan, I don't like the sound of this game. Can you imagine it in heat like this? Who could sit in a closed water tank? Don't make a mountain out of a molehill. This is the first time. Do you know what will happen? You'll get into the tank 5 minutes from the frontier, and 15 meters beyond it, you'll climb out. We'll repeat the performance for another 5 minutes at Mullah on the Kuwait border, and then suddenly you'll find yourselves in Kuwait." Assad shook his head and stared at the ground, grimacing his lower lip. Marwan had begun to play with a dry twig, while Abu Qais went on staring at the tall river. Suddenly Marwan asked, "Is there any water in the tank?" "Of course not. What are you thinking of? Am I a smuggler or a swimming teacher?" It seemed that Abul Kharazan liked the idea, for he started to chuckle, hitting his thighs with his hands and turning around. "What are you thinking of? Am I a swimming teacher? Listen, my boy, the tank hasn't seen any water for 6 months. "I thought you were carrying the water for a hunting expedition a week ago," said Assad quietly. "Oh, well, you know what I mean." "No, I don't know. I mean for 6 days. One exaggerates sometimes. Now, are we agreed? Let's bring this momentous meeting to an end." Abu Qais stood up, preparing to say the decisive word, but before he spoke, he let his eyes wander over them all, and then waited a little, looking at Assad as though he were imploring him for his help. He went up to Abul Kharazan. "Listen, Abul Kharazan, I'm a simple man. I don't understand all these complications. But that story of a hunting expedition, I didn't like it. And you say you carried water for Haj Rida, and now you say that the tank of your lorry hasn't seen the sight or smell of water for 6 months. I'll tell you the truth, and I hope you won't be angry. I doubt whether you have a lorry at all." Abu Qais turned to the others and continued in a sad voice, "I prefer to pay 15 dinars and go with the smuggler by the desert road. I don't want any more problems. Abul Kharazan laughed, saying loudly, "Go, and see what it's like. Do you think I don't know what those smugglers? They leave you in the middle of a road and you melt away like a lump of salt. You in turn will melt away in the August heat without anyone knowing. Go on, go, and see what it's like. Many have tried before you. Would you like me to show you the way? Why do you think they would take money from you first? But I know many people who arrived there by way of the smugglers. 10% at most. Go and ask them, and they will tell you that they finished the journey without a smuggler or a guide, and that their luck helped them to survive." Abu Qais froze in his place. For a moment, it seemed he would fall. Marwan noticed that Abu Qais resembled his father closely, and he looked away from him, no longer able to concentrate his mind on a single subject. Abul Kharazan went on shouting, "You must decide quickly. I've no time to waste. I swear to you, on my honor." Asad quietly interrupted him. "Leave the subject of honor for another time. Things go better when a man doesn't swear by his honor." Abul Kharazan turned to him. "No, Mr. Asad, you're an intelligent, experienced man. What do you think?" "About what?" "About everything." Asad smiled, noticing that Abu Qais and Marwan were waiting to hear his decision. He started speaking slowly and sarcastically. "First, excuse us from believing the story of the hunting expedition. It seems to me that Haj Rita and you, sir, are involved in smuggling. I beg your pardon. Let me finish. Haj Rita believes that smuggling people on the return journey is a trivial matter, so he leaves it to you, while you, in turn, leave him the smuggling of more important things for a reasonable share of the profits. Or do you think he doesn't know you smuggle people on their return journey?" Abul Kharazan smiled broadly, showing his clean white teeth again. He seemed not to want to answer Asad. Marwan blurted out, "And the story of the hunt?" Asad replied, "The story of the hunt is cooked up for the frontier guards, not for us, but Abul Kharazan seems no harm in telling it." Abul Kharazan smiled more broadly than before and began to exchange glances with the men without saying a word. For a moment, he looked like an idiot. Abu Qais remarked, "But what does Haj Rita smuggle? You say that he's rich." They all looked at Abu Kharazan, who suddenly stopped smiling, his face again taking on an expression of carelessness and authority. He spoke decisively. "And now, that's enough chatter. You mustn't think, Mr. Assad, that you are so clever. What have you decided?" Assad said quietly, "Personally, I'm only interested in reaching Kuwait. I'm not concerned with anything else. That is why I shall travel with Abul Kharazan." Marwan said excitedly, "I will go along with you both." Abu Qais said, "Do you think that I'm capable of accompanying you? I'm an old man." Abul Kharazan laughed violently, then linked his arm with Abu Qais. "Aha! Ah! Abu Qais, who's given you the idea that you are so old? Qais, perhaps? You must come with us." They had walked a few steps forward and left Marwan and Asad standing by the concrete seat. Abu Kharazan looked back over his shoulder and shouted, "Abu Qais will sleep in the lorry with me. I'll come and sound my horn in front of the hotel tomorrow morning, early." That's the end of that section. We've been going for another 40 minutes. Oh, yeah, we're done for tonight. That was, that was quite a bit of reading. So I hope everyone enjoyed. Power to the people and free Palestine.